11 ways to motivate your management team. We're going to talk about an interesting subject, and that's the subject of motivation, because I think that each of us is constantly looking for ways that we can help the people that we work with work more effectively. And that's motivation. And we're constantly looking for what is that key that can really unlock the potential of each one of those people. And what I'd like to do is start by giving you 3 basic principles of motivation, the first of which might shock you. And here's principle number 1. You cannot motivate other people. Now you might say, wait a minute, this is about motivation, and you start by telling me you can't motivate other people. That's right, and bear with me a moment. Let's go on a little bit, and I think that what I'm saying will make some sense for you. Principle number 2 is that all people are motivated. And you might say, wait a minute, I know some people, they're late 3 days a week, they're sick the other 2 days. You mean to tell me they're motivated? Absolutely. They're more motivated to be sick and late than well and on time. Why? Because motivation is a motive for acting. It's a reason for doing what we do, and almost all of us can justify or explain our behavior. Which leads me to principle number 3, and that's that people do things for their reasons, not your reasons. People do things for their reasons, not your reasons. Now that allows me then to go back and add a parenthesis to number 1. You can't motivate other people, but you can create a climate or an environment where they motivate themselves. You can create a climate or an environment where they motivate themselves. And that's what we want to look at, is how can we create then that motivational environment. And I think sometimes what's helpful is to look at what destroys motivation in people. So what I'd like to do is talk for just a little bit about how to kill motivation. I mean, maybe you've got some people that are just too motivated, too enthusiastic, too eager to get the job done. Let me give you 5 ways that you can kill the motivation of almost any adult. Number 1 is have little personal contact. Have little personal contact. For example, if you call a meeting, be the last one to show up at the meeting and make sure that as soon as the meeting's over, you leave so you don't interact with anyone. You just come in, do the meeting, and leave. Never stop by to see somebody while they're working. See them only when you absolutely have to. And that's sure to dampen people's enthusiasm, because most people like contact. They like to connect. So number 1, have little personal contact. Number 2, get people in a passive mood and keep them there. You know, let me use an example out of a meeting. Let's say that you're doing some sort of staff meeting, or it might be a sales meeting. Well, my suggestion would be that you use a lot of lecture, don't use any interaction, and if it's an all-day meeting, after lunch, start off with a film, preferably black and white, about an hour long, at least 20 years old, and make it clear that if there's any props or any equipment shown in the film, it's obvious to everybody that this is obsolete. Okay, so get people in a passive mood and keep them there. Why? Because most people really prefer to be involved. So if you don't allow that, you'll kill their motivation. Number 3 is assume that people can apply what they're taught. Don't bother with examples. I mean, these are adults, so if you want them to do something, just tell them what to do and don't bother to explain it. Certainly don't show them how to do it. Just tell them what to do and then skip the examples. I mean, you can run much shorter meetings. If you skip the illustrations, you can cut your meeting times by 80%. Of course, nobody will be able to apply anything because most of us like examples. I mean, somebody might say something to us, and what we really get excited about is, give me an example. And then somebody gives that example, and it turns the light bulb on for us. So skip the examples. Number 4, be quick to criticize. Be quick to criticize. And remember this management principle. Criticism should be delivered in public. Praise, if any, given in private. Okay, criticism should be given in public, praise, if any, given in private. Matter of fact, I think back to a time about, probably 10 years ago or so. I was at a meeting, and I thought, well, here's a great opportunity for me to be a participant. And so the speaker arrived, and as a matter of fact, he illustrated probably every one of the principles we've talked about so far, because this meeting had a reception from 5 to 6 and a dinner from 6 to 7. And then at 7 o'clock, the speaker showed up. I mean, he was not there for the reception. He was not there for the dinner. And he started his presentation by saying, I don't really know what I'm doing here. But I was told that I had something useful to say, so here goes. And actually, I could have been better prepared for this, but I thought that this was next Tuesday, and it wasn't until this morning I realized I was supposed to be here tonight. Now, of course, you'd be eager to go to a management meeting with that kind of focus, wouldn't you? And so he said, but here goes. With that, he picked up a piece of chalk and proceeded to lecture. And he lectured for 55 minutes. And at the end of 55 minutes, he said, do you believe that if you change attitudes, you change behavior, or that if you change behavior, you change attitudes? I got to remember, this is a group that's had an hour reception, an hour's worth of dinner, 55 minutes of lecture. Half of us couldn't even remember the question by the time he completed it. And he got absolutely no response. So I raised my hand. And he looked at me and said, you want to try? And I said, well, I believe that if you change attitudes, you always influence behavior. And if you change behavior, you sometimes influence attitudes. Now, by that point in my career, I had academic training that said that it was true. I also had 10 years' experience in industry that told me it was true. And you have to remember, I'm sitting with about 30 people that I didn't know very well. Had just met a couple of hours earlier. And this person looked at me and said, do you still believe that? All the literature points out, and I always wonder when somebody says that, all what literature? I mean, I do a little reading, and I think I have fairly good self-esteem, but I didn't feel too good. And then finally, he went on, and about 15 minutes later, he went up to a flip chart, and he said, we were doing some research for an insurance company, and they found that sales of new agents would go up for about 18 months, but then they would drop and level off, and they wanted to find out what is it that's happening at 18 months that's causing those sales to drop. And what do you think we found when we did the research? And he got absolutely no response. So I raised my hand. And he said, you want to try again? And I said, well, they ran out of relatives. Now, I admit that when you're thinking about insurance, that maybe that's a stereotypical response, that insurance salespeople start with friends and relatives. But, at least it got the ball rolling. Now he could have said, that's a really good guess, but we found that they ran out of relatives right at about 6 months. But, that's a really good guess. Does anybody else have a guess? He could have said that. He didn't. He looked at me and said, that's wrong. Does anybody else want to try? No one else wanted to try. Now, he went on for about another 35 minutes, which, by the way, put him 20 minutes over his appointed ending time. And then he was finished. Now, when I point to this table, I'd like you to go like this. And when I point to this table, I'd like you to go like this. And when I point to this table, I'd like you to go like this. Okay, so get ready. That is about the round of applause that he got. Now, the interesting thing is he then went up to the head of this group and said, I really was reluctant to do this, but obviously it was well received. I'd like to come back. And then he was the first one to leave. And then, frankly, 35 of the 40 of us at this meeting went across the street to a little coffee shop, and that's where the real learning took place. Did you see when he did that? Did you hear when he said that? I mean, think about the 5 ways we've talked about to kill motivation. Have little personal contact. He was the last one there, the first one to leave. Get people in a passive mood and keep them there. He asked 2 questions in almost 2 hours. Assume they'll apply the information, skip the example. He had only one example. in 2 hours. Be alert to criticize. I thought he did a marvelous job of that. And then the fifth way to squelch motivation he also illustrated, and that's make people feel stupid for asking questions. And he certainly succeeded in that. Now, I think that probably each of us in our experience has had a manager or supervisor who probably exhibited at least some of those things. Now, the question is very easy. I mean, we could say to ourselves, well, okay, all I'll do is I'll stop doing those things. Or I'll do the opposite. You know, I'll have contact. I'll have involvement with my people. But I think beyond that, we need to be proactive because sometimes different people need different kinds of things. And so let me just give you some suggestions that you can use to create a personal climate of motivation for each person that you work with. Number one is to create a need. And what I mean by that is that as adults, we want to see a purpose behind what we're doing. We want to understand the reason why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, when we're children, people say, do it, and we say, why? And they say, because I said so, that's why. You know, but as adults, we like a little bit more than that. And sometimes we want to know what problem it solves. I mean, how will this help me do my job faster, better, easier? You know, especially if we're talking about perhaps wanting people to use new technology and they're comfortable with old technology. And rather than just saying, do it because it's your job, how will this help me if I learn this new technology? There's a saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But you can salt the oats. So number one, create a need. Number two, develop a sense of personal responsibility. Develop a sense of personal responsibility. In the final analysis, people take pride in their own accomplishments. And so what we need to look at is how are ways that we can make people responsible. Can we delegate a task that's there so that once it's accomplished, they can look at that and say, yes, this is mine? Can they see the individual contribution to perhaps a larger picture that they're involved in? So that we pass responsibility from ourselves as managers and supervisors to those people that we work with so that they feel empowered, which is the phrase that's used today, and they feel a sense of accountability for what they're doing as well. Number three, create and maintain interest. Create and maintain interest. And what I mean by that is that people like to be involved and people also need to be stimulated. Now, some people work in jobs where there's a lot of natural variety. If there isn't, maybe one thing we need to look at is how can I perhaps put some more variety in this job? Could I do some cross-training where people can learn to be familiar with things that other people around them do so that when there's some downtime, instead of sitting waiting for work, maybe they can get involved in some other things that gives them a little variety to their job. We've seen situations where, for example, people that were very good at doing something became temporary trainers to take a few hours out of their job to go into a training session and teach people to do what they do. And that created some stimulus. Another way that we can maintain interest is encourage people to ask questions. That provides some people with a lot of security because I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but you go into a new job. Maybe you're hired by a new company. And for the first couple of weeks, you're sort of hesitant to ask questions. I mean, you want to fit in. You want people to feel that they made the right choice in hiring you, but you're sort of afraid to ask questions. And by the time you're comfortable enough to ask questions, you've been around too long to ask questions. I mean, now you feel as if I should already know this, and so I was afraid at the beginning because I was new, and now I'm afraid because I'm not new. All right, but we can encourage people to ask questions and let them know that really the only foolish question is the question that we don't ask. And, you know, isn't that also a part of that personal contact, of making sure that especially in the initial stages we spend time with that new employee so that they feel comfortable enough to come to us with their questions, with their issues, with their concerns. Okay, number 4, structure experiences to apply content to life. Structure experiences to apply content to life. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times we give people examples or illustrations or information in meetings, but we don't give them the time to step back and say, okay, how does this apply on my job? And I find that as a manager or a supervisor, I don't necessarily have to make that application for them. What I can do is give them some thinking time and some discussion time so that they can find their own applications. And can you see how that ties into that idea of fostering personal responsibility? You know, it's helping them come up with their own answers that I can then, as their manager, validate and say that's right on target. And see, also that's part of ownership. You know, when we're part of the decision process, or when we come up with an idea, we'll defend that idea, we'll apply that idea, we'll make that idea work. Number 5, give recognition, encouragement, and approval. Give recognition, encouragement, and approval. William James, the Harvard psychologist, said the greatest need of every human being is the need for appreciation. Most of us are like dry sponges waiting for a drop of appreciation. People are very quick to point out when we've done something wrong, and generally we don't even need their help. But they'll come along and say, do you know what's wrong? We go, yes, I knew that. And say, well, I just wanted to be sure. And say, well, thanks very much for pointing that out, especially in front of all of these people. You know, and then finally, we do something that is so right, we can hardly believe we've done it ourselves. And so we wait for somebody to say something. And we wait, and we wait, and we wait. And finally, we grab someone and explain to them in full color, in vivid detail, this right thing we've done. And then we're likely to get something like, well, isn't that your job? I thought that's what you were paid for. You know, it's about time. You know, and I think sometimes we show appreciation least to the people that we say count the most. I think sometimes we show appreciation least to the people we say count the most. Now, I know that some of us in this room are single, others are married, but probably each of us as an adult has had a significant other in our lives. And it's that person I'd like you to think about. And I'd like you to think about whether or not you've ever had that person say this to you. Honey, do you love me? And of course, the reaction is, of course I love you. I'm here, aren't I? I mean, I could be someplace else. I'm not. No, we don't say that. We don't say that. It's just, of course I love you. That's not the tough question. Tough question's the next one. Why? So we go, well, well, you see, it's not that we can't think of anything to say. It's just the things that we can think of don't seem to be important enough to answer that question. I mean, we ought to be talking about climbing mountains, crossing deserts, swimming oceans. But what that person is really saying is, I need to hear from you that you care. And if you can't say it without my asking, then even though I'd rather not ask, I'll ask, do you love me? And do you care? You know, it's sort of like the guy that had just gotten married, and he said to his new bride, now, honey, I'm not very verbal, so let me just say this. I love you. If it changes, I'll let you know. You know, well, I mean, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. I had an athletic coach in high school who used to yell and scream and shout. And I was doing my absolute best to meet his standards. And finally, one day, to be honest with you, I was 15 years old. I was doing my dead level best, and in front of 60 guys on the athletic field, I broke down and I started crying. And this guy, I was about 5'10" probably at the time. He was 6'4". He came up, and I was playing football. He grabbed the face mask on my football helmet, pulled me up eye level and said, Pike, as long as I'm yelling, you know I care. When I've stopped, you know I've given up on you. Now, I know that in his mind, he probably thought this was reassuring. But to me, what I wanted to hear is when I'm doing right, tell me. And it makes it a lot easier to take the criticism when I've missed the mark. The greatest need of every human being is the need for appreciation. Give recognition, give encouragement, and give approval. Number 6 is foster wholesome competition. Foster wholesome competition. Now, what I mean by that is that I compete with me. Success is what I am compared to what I can be. It is me compared with me, and it's you compared with you. And so what I'm doing is I'm looking at what is my standard, and then how do I raise that? Because I think that all too often one of the most destructive things we can do in an organization is have people compete with one another. For example, that's why in my own organizations I have never run a sales contest, but I have run incentive programs. And an incentive program says everybody that meets this standard gets the reward. Versus here's a contest and the top person gets this. Because in my experience, you do a contest like that and everybody already knows one of 2 or 3 people is going to win it. So why try? Because now we've got people competing with one another rather than saying, here are the standards, and everybody that meets that standard gets this kind of recognition, gets this kind of feedback, gets this kind of reward. So foster wholesome competition. Number 7, get excited yourself. Get excited yourself. Now, I don't mean by that when you run a staff meeting, you've got to come running from the back of the room, leap across 4 tables. But I believe that each of us can show an inner enthusiasm regardless of our personal style, and there are 2 ways I think you can show your excitement. Number 1 is as you talk to people, give people eye contact. I mean, have you ever been in a meeting where somebody's talking to you, but all the while they're talking, they're sort of looking around, making sure there isn't somebody else they should be talking to? And you really don't feel all that important, do you? So give people eye contact. And then number 2 is be available. So for example, when I go to meetings, I try to be there 15 minutes early to be able to spend time with people as they come in, regardless of whether it's my meeting that I'm running or a meeting that I'm simply attending. I want to be available. And the same thing, I try to allow 15 minutes after a meeting to just connect with people and be available. Because that demonstrates, I think, at least in my mind, here's someone who's really interested in what they're doing. And not only that, they're interested in me. And don't we perform better for someone that we know is interested in us? Okay, number 8. Establish long-range objectives. And what I mean by this is that as adults, we like to see the big picture. And then we can focus in on our piece and how our piece fits in. So set long-range objectives. Number 9, see the value of internal motives. See the value of internal motives. For example, I've seen people come to management training, not because they wanted to do a better job right now, but because they thought it was going to help them get a promotion. And you might say, well, that's a lousy reason. Well, it's better than no reason at all. It's better than someone who goes simply because they were sent. I've seen people go to sales training courses, not because they wanted to sell their company's products better, but because they were starting a little side business and they thought it would help. And you might say, well, that's terrible. Well, you know, if it helps them be better at their company job, and it causes them to be more focused in that training program because they see a personal value to themselves, why not? I've seen people go to communications training, not because they needed to communicate better on the job, but because they were having a problem talking to a son or daughter or a spouse. Well, doesn't it benefit us as an organization if that person picks up some principles from our training that helps them resolve some personal issues so that maybe they're not thinking about that when they're on the job? Because it's been my experience that if we have problems in our personal lives, we don't leave it at the door. And so that's why I think that looking at internal motives, even if people don't verbalize them, but seeing the value of that, I think helps people relax and say, you know, if that's what my takeaway is from this program, if it helps me be a better person, it also then enables me to put more energy into being a better employee. And I think there's also some loyalty to an organization that helps people accomplish things that are important in their personal lives as well as their professional lives. Then number 10, intensify interpersonal relationships. Now, some people think, okay, that means that I as a manager really have to spend a lot of time with my people, and I'm not really meaning that as much as I'm meaning help people to connect with one another. See, because as a manager, my time is limited. But if I can help people within the organization develop connections so that they feel comfortable talking to somebody in another department about a problem because somehow they've connected with that person, it makes them have many more options for how to get the help they need than to say, gee, this is the only person that I can get help from, and he is not available or she is not available, and so I guess I just have to sit here at my workplace and feel frustrated or try to figure it out on my own. So for that reason, when we conduct training programs, many times we will suggest that various departments be represented as a way to help people connect with people in other departments. By the same token, when we do team building, we suggest that we sort of build the team with everybody in the department. It's sort of hard for 4 people from the department to go to 4 different team building programs and then come back and try to function as a team. But intensify those interpersonal relationships. And then finally, number 11, give them a choice. Give them a choice. And what I mean by that is that there are many times when we give people responsibilities, but we can give them a choice on how they fulfill that responsibility. I think there are some managers who are so control-oriented that they have to plan everything down to the last detail, and they never give people a choice about how to execute it at all. And so let me just suggest to you, for example, you may have people that you feel are fairly immature and they really don't understand too much about the organization or the process that you want them to do. But there are still ways that we can delegate responsibility to them. And let me suggest to you 5 things that I found helpful in my own experience. Number 1 level of delegation, and this is sort of bonus information that I'm sort of springing on you. So level 1 delegation is collect the information, give it to me, I'll make the decision. But I can still give them a choice as to how they collect that information and say, if you need some help on resources, I can give you that. Level 2 is collect the information, give me some options, and I'll make the choice. All right, but see, there's now a little bit more involvement because that person was perhaps a little bit more experienced, a little bit more mature. They've proven themselves to you a little bit more. Level 3 is gather the information, give me the options, and then tell me what you would do, and I'll make the decision. Okay, level 4 goes one step beyond that. Gather the information, give me the options, give me your decision, and unless you hear back, implement it. And then level 5 is, here's the task, I don't need to know anything else. Just do it. But you see, so many times managers think that level 5 is what delegation is, and unless I've got somebody mature enough to do the whole thing, I can't delegate anything. I can't give people choices. Now think about these things in light of your own experience. I mean, what would it mean to you if you worked in an environment where you were given responsibility, where you were encouraged to ask questions, where you were given choices, when you were given recognition and praise and appreciation? I mean, is there anybody here that gets too much of it? You say, oh, I'm thinking about leaving this company because if I get any more praise, you know, I don't think any of us is short of it. Well, if this will help create a motivational environment for us, and some of us might be here going, boy, I wish my boss was here. You know, if your people were watching this, they might be saying exactly the same thing. Boy, I wish my boss was here. Well, you know, the terrific thing is their boss is here. And so now it's a matter of, some people talk about it, some people do it. Let me encourage you to take some time to think about these and not run back and try to do all 11 things at once. Because I think sometimes what happens is we come back from a meeting and as if we're shot out of a cannon and people go, oh, give them a couple of days, they'll be back to normal. Or we go back and we tell them all the things we're going to do. And then if we don't, they go, oh, you see, we were set up again. Promises made, not fulfilled. So let me just suggest that you just quietly go back, pick out 2 or 3 of these things, and decide to work on them for a week. And then as you see those things working, pick out 2 or 3 more. And just slowly build them into your everyday pattern. Slowly build them into your repertoire so that they become a part of you. And if you do that, I think what you'll find is that your day-to-day management is going to be a lot more fun, it's going to be a lot more rewarding, and you're going to see a lot more accomplishment from your team because you've taken the time to create a climate where they can motivate themselves.